I'll try and give you a very brief summary of this. And I did have time in my mind planned for allowing time for questions and conversation, but if we don't have that, that's okay. My contact details are on at the end. So, Race Inclusion Action Plan workshops. These are something that we have started to deliver over the past year, roughly nearly exactly a year, with a few piloted in the summer before. I called it departmental level. If I say school at any point, that is what I'm referring to. We call it school. I know that some universities call it faculties. So if I say school, I'm not referring to kids. We don't work with children. So that is what I might slip into. And I would like to say, we are a team of 4 people, usually 3, sometimes 2, that deliver these sessions. Most of us are white, and we're aware of that. But we don't try to say that we're speaking for the students that we're talking about, because that's not what we can do. We have our own perspectives, our own backgrounds. We're not trying to speak for the students. Very much informed by quotes from students that we've gotten from focus groups that we've had, conversations that we've had with students, surveys that we've run, as well as research that we've done as well. So, as I imagine, I'm assuming, that you're all quite familiar with the national issue of the race awarding gap between black students and white students. And of course, with Asian students as well. Around, for the University of Leicester at the moment, we are around 14%, I think, currently, for our black and white students. And I will say we are a super diverse university. We don't have a majority ethnicity at all. Much like Leicester City, it's a super diverse city. That's how we reflect that context, definitely. In our workshops for departments, schools, we primarily focus on race, but we know that it is quite difficult for professional services to understand how to make their services more racially inclusive. So we say, well, we're a bit more wider in terms of inclusivity when we're focusing on professional services teams, but we do primarily work on race with our schools. So this is the rough process of the Race Inclusion Action Plans. We have a workshop with them for 3 hours. Thank you. We have a workshop for 3 hours just to facilitate those conversations. We talk them through some data, we talk them through their own situations, their own students. Yes, please. The schools that we're working with. So professional, when I say schools, the academic teaching departments. Sorry, thank you for asking, I should have clarified. We typically invite a mix of academic and professional services within the schools to the workshops. Most often it is academic colleagues, and that's absolutely fine. But we try to have it as a wider experience because everyone's perspectives are quite different. Professional services staff will support students in completely different ways. So we try to get everybody's input. From the workshops, we have those initial ideas, those initial conversations, but then after that workshop, I expect them to go into their team meetings and just have those conversations in corridors and online, just to keep talking, keep thinking about things. So they've had initial ideas, but thinking a bit more about it. What's priority? What else has come up? What have they realised? What more ideas have they got to develop the detail? Then I re-meet with them, talk to them about what do you think is going to go into your action plan? What are your priorities? And I will say at this point, your action plan isn't the whole detail of what you're going to be doing in terms of inclusivity and racial inclusion specifically, because that's not possible. You can't list everything, but it's just these are our priority areas for the foreseeable future. Then we agree on the details, go back and forth with making sure that they've got their sufficient plans. We do base it on the theory of change, so we'll be able to evaluate the work that they do later. And then it's signed off for approval. For professional services teams, that is the academic registrar. And for academic teaching schools, teaching departments, it's signed off by the PBC of Education. This is a little bit more around the action plan itself. We do have basically a form that is essentially based on the theory of change. But to summarise it, just to help guiding the conversations in the workshops, I ask these 3 questions. Now change to slightly different questions, but we ask them what do they want to change? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And why? Is this just a random decision? Because we really want it to be informed by their students. We're not interested in a generic plan, because that's not going to do anything. If you know your students have issues in certain areas, you know that they have issues with accessing certain things, we need to focus on those areas. So we want it to be informed by their actual situation and how can we go about it. And we do a lot of work with supporting them on the how and how will we know the evaluation. We do a lot of work in supporting them with that aspect because that's where, I've noticed, this is where colleagues lack the most confidence in knowing, but what can we do to achieve that and how will we know? Evaluation confidence is very low generally, I would say, which is fair enough. As a sector, we're not very good at evaluating the work that we do. There are pockets of practice and we read publications, but day to day we're not very good at evaluating to say this is how I know this is good, this is worth doing. So we're trying to embed that culture. So as I've said, we are a super diverse university, so I think it's really important, because I've been to some conferences this year where you hear presentations and they're amazing, but when they're talking about the awarding gap specifically, or initiatives targeting certain groups, you think, what proportion of your students do you actually affect? So I think it's really important to cover the ethnicity detail. So in 2021, this was our intake of students, well, our current cohort of students. This includes distance learners, postgraduate postgraduate research, and undergraduates. This is just a wide, and I think even since then, in 22, 23 data, I think it's even more diverse than this. But we're quite proud of that situation. Like, we're happy for that to be the case. But as you'll see, in terms of having race awarding gaps, we're letting down the majority of our students. And that's what we absolutely need to change. As I did mention, we're based in Leicester, Leicester being super diverse. So in the most recent census, in 2011, this is what Leicester looks like. We like to think it might be, well, no, sorry, this is the previous census, and we see a lot of similarities between the data. We're very reflective of the city, but we're thinking this might guide where we could be going. If this is the comparison of Leicester 10 years ago, 12 years ago now as it is, maybe this is where we're going. I'll put 2011, that's a typo, don't worry about that, it's 2021. So it's Leicester's a lot more diverse. Perhaps this is the future of the city, of our university. We'll get more diverse. So we need to be making changes now to be making sure that the students that come in aren't having the same frustrating experience that previous students have had and current students might be having as well. We also find it quite important to be comparing religions to the city, like, again, incredibly reflective of where we are in the city. It's amazing. And we didn't realize until we created this slide just how similar they are, and it's brilliant. But when you think about how universities work, we're based on a very Christian calendar. And when it comes to, for instance, the Ramadan period, I think research has been done to show that students are 10% less, they achieve by 10% less, or 10% less efficient in their working, in their studying during that period. Because that period is supposed to be a time of like reflection and reflecting on their spirituality, not worrying about deadlines. But our Christian-based calendar, academic calendar, and UK calendars don't really take that into consideration. So I think a lot of universities have stuff like mitigating circumstances, extenuating circumstances that don't necessarily apply to assessments. They might apply to exams maybe, but they don't apply to assessments. And should they really need to submit circs, extenuating circumstances, just for religion? Because we don't have to do it for Christmas or Easter. So we have a lot of these issues come up in our conversations that students are experiencing. And we know that there are rewarding gaps in other areas. These are the sort of areas that we talk about the most often. IND, indices of multiple deprivation. So quintiles 1 and 2 are the least affluent areas of the country. 3 to 5 are the most affluent areas of the country. We are quite often seeing that students, again, very diverse. We have students from all of the quintiles. 1 and 2 being having quite a substantial awarding gap in most subjects. Age is quite interesting because in mature students, their continuation between first and second year, staying in university is the challenge. If they stay past that first year, then they're amazing, and they will outperform your younger students. But it's actually just getting them to stay in university. In terms of sex, At the moment, this is what we have to report on is female and male. We are looking to expand that. So that's what we have to report on to the OFS. I appreciate there are gaps sometimes, depending on the subject. Black and white awarding gap, we've already discussed. Disability varies quite a lot, actually. It depends on the subject, but it really depends on whether students have declared their disability, because that is the variation that stands out the most. And of course, we're aware that there will be gaps in terms of mental health, LGBT plus students, care leavers, estranged students, carers, but we don't have sufficient data on our student numbers on those aspects to be able to report on it. But it's something that we're very sensitive about. So when we have the workshops, we show them data like that, and then we also show them school level data, department level data to say, well, that's university, this is what your student cohort looks like. And they find that really interesting, just to see it tangibly in front of them, to reflect on how many students they actually have and what that demographic looks like. Then we start talking about barriers. So we talk about data, sure, but it's very much that anecdotal, qualitative feedback that is the most important. Okay, we can look at data, lovely, but what do your students say to you? What do you overhear? What are you experiencing? Being in the room with them, tell us what barriers they're facing. We know from conversations with students, these are the sort of things that they might be talking about and they might be going through. And in doing that, what do we have in place to address it? We also ask them about how they actually get feedback from students, and typically it goes down to module feedback. We have a module feedback system. Oh, do your students respond to it? No, they never do. You get like a response of 3, and that's, they always say that with an insecurity, but it's the same across the whole university, that students don't always respond to module feedback. Fine. But it's not just about that. It's not just about surveys. It's about the conversations, about your student staff committee meetings, societies. What are those relationships like with your students? And what do you do with the feedback? You've got this list of like suggestions, student emails or conversations, personal tutor notes. What happens with it? And even if you do act on it, do you tell them? Because sometimes students are like, oh, you never change anything. And staff are frustrated because they change a lot. But they don't necessarily come back to say, no, we made changes to this module. We've made it better because last year they found it really difficult. We'll make it better this year. And if you are telling students, we will listen to you, and here is evidence, they're more inclined to then tell you more. They're more inclined to give you feedback later on. And this sense of community, I don't know what it's like in all other universities, but I imagine the sense of belonging coming up a lot. I've seen it certainly in like wonky articles and all of those sort of sources. I personally struggle with the idea of this conversation of sense of belonging. And I attended the RAISE conference in Leeds a few months ago, which very much focused on student engagement and belonging. And it was a fantastic conference. But I don't think we know what it means. And I think there is a project at the minute in several universities about thinking about what does it mean? But I think it really probably boils down to the sense of community, because if we can't say how belonging feels, we could probably say how community feels. And if we're working towards that, what are you actually doing? What are you doing to create that sense of community? And why? What are the benefits that you think of? Because some students get their community elsewhere, and that's okay. I think it's just giving students the option of community, but what are you doing to get there? Rather than saying like whether we have it or not, how do you know? Oh, hello.
Oh.
Don't know why that's happened. This day isn't working for us, is it?
So your computer's still fine?
Yeah.
The crest on the box has crashed. Yeah, that's died. That thing up there? I don't know. Do we need to call IT? Yeah, could you call IT for me?
There's a phone there, 6050. Do you want me to do it?
Yes, please, because I'm not... Oh, there's a phone right here, isn't there?
Yeah. Are you okay doing it?
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to carry on talking without the slides?
Don't worry about the slides. I'll show you the slides and we can always share them later. I'm more than happy to do that. What I was about to show you is the next section of where we start talking about what an inclusive curriculum can look like. Because in a lot of cases, oh, thank you, yes. There are also quotes on this, if you can see. Because I think a lot of concern around members of staff is, well, I'm not trying to be
just pressed option 1, is that the right
so I don't really know what you mean by being inclusive.
I think so.
What am I doing? In a lot of cases, people are already being quite inclusive, but they're not conscious of it, or they don't really know how to do more of it. And in some cases, I'm asked about, like, when it comes to little changes, what's the point? The students really see the benefit of making little changes, and what you probably won't be able to see are the quotes that are appearing on the screen. But that's okay. But it's basically feedback.
It's in Bede House from ground floor.
Why this is so important to students individually.
0.17.
You don't want to express struggle or needing support because they already think the worst of you. As black people, when we must be seen, we must be exceptional to be seen, and it becomes demoralising. I feel like the world just isn't set up for how my brain works.
It's Ajax.
If I don't rehearse what I'm going to say in my head,
03. So I think it's just turning back on. Perfect. It's done. Sorted. Thank you so much.
well,
How did that happen?
Cheers. Thank you, Ben.
magic.
They could do it remotely.
Oh! Wow.
Thank you.
Now you can actually see the quotes. Thank you for pointing out the change. But basically, all of the little changes that you might be making to make the curriculum more inclusive will really make a difference to students. It might not affect the awarding gap as such, but individually, your personal experience of university could be so much better with all of these little accommodations. But they do accumulate, and we know they do, in terms of student satisfaction especially. So being inclusive in context, again, another student quote on the right-hand side there. Being more inclusive in perspective, recognising the sources of your knowledge and being diverse in the sources and acknowledging the gaps of where they come from and allowing students to actually explore things that they're interested in rather than just following what you tell them. I think that's quite varied across the university. Of course, I won't talk you through the detail of it because that's not what we're here for, but we go through this sort of content with staff in the session. This is an example that we've gotten from the chemistry department. This is how they show where research from a particular topic comes from. And then, again, you can show the gaps. Why is it that it's all, for instance, not on this idea, not on this example, but why is it all that the research is coming from South America? What's going on in Asia? What's going on in Australia? You can really, it's a really good opportunity to get into that conversation. But at the very least, it's showing students that you're conscious of this, and it allows students to think, I can explore this too in my research if I want to. This is another example from criminology, where at the end of their lecture, they just include a slide. Who is in your lecture today? So you can see the diversity of the sources. And it could just be that you see someone like you on that slide. I remember there was a physics lecture that happened where they talked about a female physicist. And it wasn't supposed to be about the female physicist, it was just an example of the great work she'd done, moved on, rest of the content. But a female student came to the front at the end of the session to say, in all my 3 years on this course, I've never seen a slide for just a female physicist, so thank you. Because it mattered so much to see herself in the content. Because you could be doing your subject and just doing okay, that's fine. But if you're not seeing yourself in the field, when you graduate, do you really want to stick around? Because not everyone wants to be that person to break the barrier. And then we talk about the assessments. So we know that there's evidence to say that the diversity in assessments and the support around assessments does reduce the awarding gap. So we want to encourage diversity in assessment types. My particular interest is explaining what it is that you actually want them to do, clarifying your language and your jargon, because not all students know what a report looks like. For instance, not all student knows what a case study is, and academics will have different expectations as to what they want from that too. But just being as clear as possible. It's not making it easy for students, but it's just being clear so that they don't spend most of their time trying to decrypt what you mean. Reading articles even. What is it that you want me to read this article for? So I can read it appropriately. Because when I was a student, I was given tasks like that. Read this article for the next seminar. Did that. And then he'd start talking about an aspect that I hadn't even considered. because that's what he wanted to do and that's what he was thinking about when he set the article, but it didn't give that context. So I feel like I had missed out on that opportunity. So just being as clear as possible, just to allow students to engage with the work the best way that they can. And then at this point we start talking about, right, we've gone through the issues that you know about in your school. We've gone through what an inclusive curriculum can look like. And we talk about inclusive practice as well, like day-to-day working with students. Now what can you do? What can actually change? What ideas are you starting to have? And it can be based on any of these aspects or other aspects as well, because people have a lot of creative ideas. I think it's a really good opportunity, and a piece of feedback that we always get at the end of these sessions is, thank you, we never get the opportunity to talk about this stuff. And just having that space to say, I've been thinking about this for years, and just getting it out there, it can be the start of something that you've really wanted to change. So this is a sample of some of the positive feedback that we've received from members of staff. Some people come up to us at the end of the session, give us feedback later, and they're so happy that they've had this chance and they've really enjoyed it. For some people, it's been really helpful to actually clarify, because I think when we talk about racial inclusivity, that can be really concerning for some people. They talk about, I don't have the expertise in this area. My expertise is in this specific subject I've never heard of before. And that's fine, because it's not required, especially at this starting point, to say, being more inclusive, look at all of these opportunities in the previous slides. If you start on that, leads to bigger changes, like more changes later, and just build up your confidence at the very least. So there are some challenges, certainly, around doing these workshops. Time, absolutely. I don't think anyone foresaw how much time it would take from our side of actually planning and delivering the sessions, because we tailor it for every workshop, for each school, for each professional services team, what's going to be best for you. So it does take a lot of time, but that tailoring is worth it. The commitment is absolutely essential, because you can sit in a room for 3 hours if you like, but what's that going to change? It's the after bit where you actually continue, like you're following up with a plan. You're working with other colleagues in the school to make these changes happen. And the follow-up support is essential. Like, we are on hand to help them with their plan. Again, that lack of confidence really shows when we're going through the plan. But the ideas are there. They know what to do. They're just a bit nervous about putting it onto paper, and especially with the evaluation, which we help with. Now, some of the barriers that were faced in a lot of sessions, well, most of the people that come are either, I'm not sure what this means, or I'm really loving that we're finally talking about this, and it's been something I cared about for years. There's always people in the room that don't care, that they don't understand it, they don't like it, because change is hard, respect that. So either they don't come, or they put up resistance in the room, like they just don't get it. They'll ask us challenging questions, talk about a lack of data. Can you give us a really niche bit of data on BTEC students that have come through clearing? For instance, really specific stuff that isn't necessary to the change. You're just saying, well, we can't do it until we've got the data on that. It's just an excuse, and it's just concern, nervousness about the change. But we need to be bolder than that. We can't just say, oh, fair enough, can't make a change until then. No, we need to keep pushing. And the debate for the sake of debate links to the data very much. Oh, we're talking about these students, but what about, white working class boys? We know that's an issue too. But if we target these areas, other people are going to benefit. Inclusive curriculum doesn't just target black students, for example. I like to reference this TASO report that came out a few months ago, because I think it's brilliant just for this quote, and it really backs up what we've been saying about the lack of confidence. Low levels of confidence in addressing inequality and high levels of discomfort in discussing issues of race and ethnicity are barriers to progress, especially with white staff who might feel that they lack expertise or lived experience to affect change. We are not saying you can't teach certain things. Definitely don't do that. We're not saying you need to talk from your own background. I mean, if you've got background, I think declaring positionality is a wonderful thing in terms of your own expertise. I was talking to an academic yesterday who'd failed some of their GCSEs, A-levels, had failed several parts of their undergraduate degree, and yet now they were teaching as a doctor. I think knowing that perspective as a student can really help to say, I face similar struggles. But no, you won't necessarily be able to identify in matters of race. So talk to your students. Find out what they want to know. Find out what change they think you can make. So I hope I've stuck to time. Thank you all so much. If you do want to contact me at any point about the workshops or any other aspects around the student EDI, you're more than welcome to get in touch. But I appreciate the time that you've given me today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire.